Segregation in the Military During World War II by B.W. Elijah Prudent and Mario Moreno. During World War II, racial restriction and segregation were aspects of life in the U.S. military. Nevertheless, a large majority of African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Japanese Americans participated in the fight against the Axis powers, however, with an objective toward ending racial discrimination in the American society. This objective was expressed in the call initiated in the black press for the double victory over fascism abroad and over racism at home. The government was well aware of the demoralizing impact of racial discrimination on the American population and its impacts on the war effort. Therefore, it promoted posters, pamphlets, and films highlighting the participation and achievements of African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Japanese Americans in the military and civilian life. The discrimination was so horrendous that during an interview, an anonymous black soldier stated, quote unquote, "We are treated like wild animals, like we are inhuman. The word Negro is never used here. All they call us are nigger. Nigger do this, nigger that. Even the officers here are calling us nigger." The discrimination was so cruel that even when the war veterans returned home, they were treated in the most sadistic ways. A war veteran wrote a letter directly to President Truman stating, "Dear Mr. President, I am now enclosing to you herewith clippings which I have taken out from the PM which tells how Southern policemen gouged out both eyes of a returned Negro veteran. This was done by means of their clubs. Mr. President, I am not able to put this matter before you even as I feel it. To gouge out the eyesight of a man who has used his eyes to safeguard the freedom of his country is truly a disgrace unheard of in any other country of the world." African Americans were not the only one to suffer from these discriminations. Hispanic Americans joined the military during World War II to prove their citizenship. They were treated as second-class citizens at home. Returning Latino servicemen increasingly protested their treatment as outsiders unorganized to advance at home the democratic ideals they fought for abroad. In 1949, a Texas funeral home denied use of the chapel for Felix Longoria, a Mexican-American who died in combat during World War II. The American GI Forum, a Mexican-American veterans organization, successfully attained a proper burial for him at Arlington National Cemetery, but most discriminations against Mexican-American soldiers went unchecked. The following picture was taken to stress the need for interracial solidarity in the post-war world. African American and white soldiers got together as part of the Army's general education program at a heavy bomber base in Italy, arranged by Colonel David C. Epps. In 1940, President Franklin Roosevelt upheld the segregation of colored and white soldiers into different regimes, believing integration would threaten the military's efficiency and increase racial tension. Throughout the war, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Japanese Americans pressured the government to end this discriminatory policy. President Harry Truman eventually organized the Presidential Committee on Civil Rights, which declared that, quote unquote, "the injustice of calling men to fight for freedom while subjecting them to humiliating discriminations within the fighting forces is at once apparent." On July 26, 1948, President Truman signed Executive Order 9981 ending racial segregation in the U.S. Armed Forces. The order marked a significant step towards increased government intervention in securing civil rights.